All right, thanks very much. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm extremely happy to be here to present. You already heard my background is in behavioral economics, econ history, but also human evolutionary biology. So quite a bit different from history. So what I'm going to present you today is a very zoomed out version of why I think Christianity, or more specifically, the Western Church, was so important to shape civil society in Europe. And also a bit of a warning, what I'm presenting here is really in line with this tradition in economics where we try to pin down that there is a cause and effect from a specific factor, but that's not that I'm arguing for monocausality. What I want to do is I want to establish there was a link. Other factors play a role as well, but here I'm zooming in, trying to establish a link from the medieval Western Church to civil society. And I also want to emphasize that the symposium is about Protestantism. I'm very happy to be the first speaker because what I will be talking about mostly is before the 1500s. So I'm kind of thinking about what laid the groundwork in a way for the Protestant Reformation. And thinking about civil society, the question comes a bit, how do we want to measure civil society? What is civil society? And this question could, I guess, one measure that could be used is human cooperation. And that really was drawing me to this question about European divergence and what is different in Europe. What drew me and started me with this whole research agenda is that I started to travel around the world because I wanted to see how people cooperate with each other, people who do not know each other. So I wanted to capture a measure of impersonal cooperation. Now, if you go around the world and just ask people, do you like to cooperate and contribute to the common good? Probably everyone will say yes. But it's very different if there's real financial stakes involved. And that's what I did. So I went to a country and I set up a laboratory. I invited students to this laboratory and gave them real money and put them in a social dilemma task. So they came to my laboratory. I formed anonymous groups of 4 people. I gave each person real money, and each person then could decide of how much of this real money to keep for themselves and how much to contribute to a group. Now the social dilemma arises because the money contributed to the group is shared, is multiplied, so it's made larger, but it's shared equally. And that means the individual optimal, the selfish thing to do is not to contribute anything and free ride on other people's contribution. And standard theory about rational selfish behavior would predict that cooperation unravels and no one's cooperating. Because people have a financial incentive to free ride. Now, these are the countries I visited to conduct these experiments. And here you get some sense of how those experiments are conducted. It's really made sure that people don't see what others are doing. You see these divider walls. The financial stakes are adjusted such that the purchasing power is the same and so forth. So these data is really revealed behavior of people. How do they cooperate if they do not know each other? So what you see here now is cooperation rates among student samples in different countries around the world. On the y-axis, these are the rates, so people could share anything between 0 and 20, and this is a measure of how people approach cooperation with others that they don't know, and you see a huge variation. So in the country on the right-hand side, in the countries on the right-hand side, people on average maybe contributed a third, so around 7 monetary units of their initial money. But on the left-hand side, you see cooperation is a lot higher. And if you want to explain that as an economist, I thought it's the quality of formal institution that ensures that people also cooperate once these formal institutions are away. But what you see here now in these red bars, these are former socialist countries. And these formerly socialist countries you see all over the place. There's quite a variation. You see Georgia, the country, has rather low cooperation rates. And on the other hand, Slovakia or the Czech Republic, they have a lot higher cooperation rate. And the question then is, how can we explain this global variation in human cooperation that we find in the lab? And the hypothesis I want to show you here and show you some evidence is that strong kin-based institutions are detrimental to impersonal cooperation, participatory institution. And of course, that's not a new hypothesis. You can already find that by St. Augustine of Hippo's work, the City of God Against the Pagan, but also in Weber and Immanuel Todd. And the other aspect then is that or the second hypothesis is that the church marriage regulations, prohibitions on certain kinds of marriages, dissolved Europe's clan-based kin structure, and ultimately then this paved the way for liberal democracy, civil society that we think about today. And yeah, really what I want to show you here is empirical evidence that lends some credibility to this hypothesis. And to give you an idea of the bigger picture, so in our evolutionary past, when we were mobile hunter-gatherers, probably it made sense to have extensive kinship ties. So we would trace our ancestry, like in Western societies now, through both the mother's and father's side. We could very diverse kinship networks, and that would help people in case of threats or disasters like droughts, to be able to mitigate this risk. So in case of droughts, you could ask your faraway relatives to lead you to water. This changes then during the Neolithic transformation. You get the rise of very strong kinship networks. Why is that? Because it allows for the protection of property. There's a strong investment, let's say, in irrigation. So you really want to make sure that your property, your investment is protected. So this gives rise to cousin marriage, but also unilineal descent. And the thing about unilineal descent is that you trace your ancestry only through one side of the family, and that gives non-overlapping kinship networks. So if you trace it only through one side of the family, there's no person, or every person falls in exactly only one kinship group. Then you get co-residents, and all this creates very tight networks. It creates a web of ascribed obligations, responsibilities, but of course also a safety net. And now I want to zoom out a bit. If you think about theories in evolutionary biology or cultural evolution, so evolutionary theories, if they try to explain human cooperation, it's always about assortment. You need assortment for humans to cooperate. And if you restrict assortment, maybe through these kinship networks, then cooperation is likely not be the scope of cooperation, impersonal cooperation is likely not to emerge to the same degree. Well, and then you have the Catholic, and these loyalty demands then lead to an in-group morality, to limited trust. It's detrimental to participatory institutions. And it's also detrimental to innovation. Why is that? Because if you think about innovation as a recombination of ideas, that people from all walks of life work together for a common goal. So the important thing is here, it's also about shared interests. Then you don't get innovation. Then you get echo chambers. And the point I want to make then is that the church started to dismantle these strong kin-based institutions in Europe, beginning in late antiquity. So what did the Western Church do? They prescribed free consent of groom and bride for marriage. And we often think about the Catholic Church as this very conservative institution, but there it went against the pre-existing norms of arranged marriages. Then it forbade polygamy, divorce. I wrote here discourage adoption, but really there was no legal framework for adoption. All you had in medieval Europe were fosterage, but here, and what I want to point out, if you have a clan-based society, where you want to let's say that the patrilineage going, and there's no offspring, there's different ways to deal with that. One would be adoption. So you just adopt a male heir and you get your lineage going. But all other forms would be you get divorced or you have multiple women to increase the chances for to keep your lineage going. But all of these policies the church went against. And very importantly, it also forbade consanguineous marriages. So these were marriages between cousins, but also marriages between affineral and spiritual kin. So the godfather wasn't allowed to marry the godchild anymore, or a man wasn't allowed to marry the sister of his deceased wife. So lots of regulations. And it all started in the 6th century. So there was a real obsession with prohibitions on incest in Merovingian Gaul. 13 out of 17 synods dealt with incest. And this is always at the forefront of their agenda. Then you see it particularly among the Carolingian rulers, Pepin and Charlemagne, in conjunction with the Pope. Out of the first, I think, 11 capitularies of Charlemagne, I think the first 2 were about incest, who you were allowed to marry, that you were not allowed to marry your cousins. And that goes with this agenda of Charlemagne to create this kingdom of God. And then in the 11th centuries, the church really went crazy and extended this ban on cousin marriage to the 5th degree. So you were not allowed to marry anyone you were related, any one of the 128 great grandparents. So that really means they took a very strong stance. But of course, that could never be enforced to this degree. It was, I guess, it was more symbolic. And then in the 13th century, they reduced it back to the 2nd degree. And there you also see where this conflict of Henry VIII with the church came from. So you're not allowed to get divorced, but you can annul a marriage if you say, well, there was some relationship going all the way back. And yeah, nobles and other people increasingly used this incest prohibition as a way to get marriage annulment. So why did they implement these rules? If you look at Augustine's writing, he says, marrying outside the kin group enlarges the range of social relations and should thereby bind social life more effectively by involving a greater number of people in them. So he really makes the same sociological argument that I made earlier. But of course, that doesn't tell us why there was this ban or why was it implemented. And Jack Goody says it was a bequest motive. So in Matthew 9, the Bible says it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. So one solution then for a rich man was to bequest his wealth just before his death to the church, and that would make him go to heaven. So that's the argument here. If you don't have offspring, which is less likely if you have implemented all these marriage policies, then more bequest goes to the church, and of course the church liked it. But more generally, many pagan religions are about ancestor worship, and that really falls in line with the clan-based, lineage-based organization of society or organization of kinship. So you venerate some ancestral, mystical ancestor, and if you want to get rid of this religion, one way to get rid of this pagan religion then is to go against clans and lineages. So this was probably a way of the church to consolidate power. And just to summarize my key argument again, the church and secular rulers, starting in the 6th century, implement marriage regulations targeted to destroy clans and lineages. That changes the kinship structure. This now gives free association due to shared interest. So you get the rise of communes, universities, monasteries. These are all non-kin-based institutions. But it also fosters an impersonal pro-sociality and like I said, the formation of democratic societies. And lastly, it will also increase information flows among diverse people and fosters innovation. And that's the empirical evidence I want to bring to you now. So first, I'm going to show you the relationship with psychology. So the hypothesis is that the dissolution of clan-based society in Europe fostered impersonal cooperation and individualistic psychology. I do this with cross-sectional data. Then I move and will show you that this scaled up. So you could think about this as a form of global cooperation to participatory institution or liberal democracy. I do this again with cross-sectional data, but also with panel data. And in econ jargon, you would say, I'm trying to establish a causal link between the medieval church and local participatory institutions. And lastly, I want to show you the link between clan-based societies in Europe and how that fostered innovation. And here the idea is really that the church created this pan-European network once it dissolved clan-based institution that allowed for the free flow of ideas. Okay, let's start with the dissolution of clan-based societies in Europe. So what we did is we created a kinship intensity index, and that's an omnibus measure of the overall strength of kin-based institution, and it's based on at the ethnographic atlas. So it's based on ethnography, and Murdoch in the 60s coded those. And the idea here of Murdoch or the ethnographic atlas is that this is before this is the coding of societies before the Industrial Revolution, before industrialization. And 5 sub-indicators enter this kinship intensity index. So we have a preference for whether a society has a preference for cousin marriage, whether the society prefers co-residing of extended families, polygynous marriage norms, the presence of unilineal descent, and community organization, basically whether clans live together or whether settlements are more dispersed. Now, if you put this together, what you see here now is the map of the world at the level of languages. So in a sense, at the level of ethnographies. And here you see how kinship intensity is distributed around the world. Bluer means lower kinship intensity, more red means higher kinship intensity. Now we can also aggregate it to the country level, then it would look something like the picture. Yeah, it looks like what you see now in front of you. And you kind of already see Western countries have a very low kinship intensity. Now what we can also look at is cousin marriage rates. So this is more contemporary, so more like at the end of the 20th century. And you see again that Western societies and Western offshores have very low cousin marriage, while you have higher cousin marriage. So in Saudi Arabia, and it's around 50%. This is first and second cousin marriages. And in Pakistan, it's even higher than 50%. The last indicator I want to show you here now is we coded the duration of Eastern and Western church exposure. So the question that we asked to code this is, how long has a region been exposed to the medieval church up to the year 1500? We used this cutoff because after already in the 13th century, these prohibitions were not really strongly enforced anymore. And after the year 1500, you get these large population movements. But what we did here in this indicator, we account for the population movements that happened after the year 1500. And if we code it then for the world, we get a map like this. So the darker the blue, the longer a country experienced this medieval church exposure. Blue is for the Western Church and green is for the Eastern Church. The Eastern Church had also prohibitions, but they were never implemented to the same degree. So if we put this together now, what you see here, I want to put it together now with human cooperation. So what you have here is the same indicator from these laboratory public goods games on the y-axis. So how do people approach cooperation among people that they do not know at a cost to themselves? And on the y-axis, you have now the kinship intensity indicator. And you see there's a negative relationship. The stronger kinship intensity, the lower cooperation among individuals that do not know each other. You can do the same with cousin marriage, very similar picture. Higher percentage of marriages of cousins, lower is the lower the cooperation among people that do not know each other. And the last figure here I show you is the longer the exposure to the medieval Western Church, the higher cooperation among people. Now, now you might wonder, this is just, these kind of laboratory games, very decontextualized, but we can also look at the different public goods, and that would be blood donations. So what you have here now on the y-axis is blood donations to non-relatives. So in a form, it's kind of giving blood to an anonymous other, and you find a very similar pattern. So the link that I haven't showed you yet is, oh, 1 second. What I really want to stress here is while Europe was at some point then different because of the Catholic Church, the same patterns also hold within Europe. And I could show you the same patterns within European regions. What I'm going to show you here now is the same pattern within Italy. So on the left-hand side, you see cousin marriages in Italy in the year 1960. You see in the north, which was part of the Carolingian Empire, cousin marriages are a lot lower than in the south of Italy. So in the south of Italy, these are now only first cousins. It would be around 4 or 5%. In the north, it's closer to to less than 1%. And on the right-hand side, you now have blood donations, and you see it's just a mirror image. It's almost a negative. And if you then put it together in a scatter plot, you see there again there's a negative relationship also within Italy. So the point I want to make is Europe is not so special in the sense that these mechanisms that I'm showing you here also hold within Europe and within European regions, but I could also show you the same link between kinship intensity, dropping all of Europe and European settler colonies, and you would get the same pattern around the world. So this is not unique in this sense. What I haven't shown you yet is the link between the medieval church exposure and cousin marriage, and that's what you see here. So the longer the exposure to the medieval church, now at the country level, the lower cousin marriages. And what I also want to point out, I talked about human cooperation in the lab and with blood donations, but you could also look at other indicators like individualism, and that's what we did here. In this panel B, you now have an indicator of an individualistic impersonal psychology that also looks at analytical thinking, individualism, fairness, trust, and so forth. And you get this very similar pattern. Higher cousin marriage rates, lower individualistic impersonal psychology. So now I want to kind of scale up to close. Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
One that comes to mind is that y-axis on the top right graph. Let's see now. Individualistic impersonal psychology. Can you tell us a bit more as to what exactly how that is quantified?
So what we did is what we wanted to show in this paper is that kin-based institution and the church had an impact on many, many different aspects of psychology, not just human cooperation, but let's say also impersonal rule following. There's a very nice indicator about, if you're in front of a judge in court, would you lie for your friend or your family or not? That would be one of the indicators. Another indicator would be basically in-person rule following in the sense of diplomats at the United Nations, where if you're a diplomat, you do not have to pay parking tickets And so if you pay parking tickets, you're kind of following rules, even so there's no enforcement. And what you see there as well is that diplomats from countries with very high cousin marriage rates are less likely to pay that. So there's many aspects of psychology. Then you have individualism. You have Asch conformity experiment. How conform are people and align with other people? And what we wanted to do here is to just synthesize that into one indicator and show how these kin-based institutions and the church impacted very many aspects of psychology.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So now I really want to jump into history, and I want to talk about participatory institutions. And again, I can just show your cross-country correlations. What you have here now on the y-axis is an indicator of the polity 4 indicator, how well democracy is working or how democratic a country is. On the y-axis, again, you have cousin marriage, and you see a clear relationship. And I have to say, cross-country relationships should always be taken with a big grain of salt. We do lots of regression analysis, but of course, you can never be sure that something else is driving that. And that's why I really want to dig into history now and look at longitudinal and panel data sets. And the question is a bit, how can you get a measure of liberal or participatory institution in starting in the medieval times? And one institution that starts emerging in the medieval times are commune cities. So what are commune cities? These are self-governed cities in which members across the boundaries of kin groups specify the rules. So this is very different than in many other societies. And I would argue that communes almost uniquely emerge in the European context. You don't see these kind of self-governance in many other places. So here I will use commune cities as the outcome variable. And my explanatory variable then is medieval church exposure. And what you should be seeing here is lots of red dots. Like I get a thumbs up, so I'm very happy. And these red dots are extending. And what these red dots are basically tracing the Christianization in Europe. And in the upper left corner, you see the year. In the year 500 is basically the Roman Empire, more or less. And then you see this extension. And one feature of Christianization, I would argue, it was mostly top-down in Europe. It wasn't that, if you think about the north of Germany, Charlemagne tried to conquer it, tried to Christianize people. It didn't work. So he was famously known as the Massacre of Verden. He would kill or massacre the people that didn't turn to Christianity. Then you also, around the year 711, you see the Umayyad conquest in Spain. So you have lots of variation in church exposure. You could think of this in some form as an experiment. And that's what I'm exploiting here in what economists would call an event study regression. So basically you exploit the onset of Christianization as captured by bishoprics and how that impacts the probability that a commune is forming at this particular place. And you compare it then to regions that have not yet received this church exposure. And what you see on the right-hand side in this figure is that before, so in minus 300 and minus 200, minus 100, before the zero, these are the centuries before the church comes in. Nothing happens. There is no commute. But then once the church comes in this century, so within this 100-year time window, you get a jump in the probability that a city becomes a commune. So this would be around 10, 12%. And then you see how it gradually increases over time. So here you have a connection now, this is all before the year 1500, between the church coming in and communes, these non-kin-based institutions that are self-governed that are forming. What I can could also show you here is, again, psychological aspects that people from societies with weak kin-based institutions are also more likely to participate in the political process today. Where I want to go now is innovation. So again, this will be mostly innovation before the year 1500. And the argument is innovation is fundamentally recombination of ideas, or that is a major driver of innovation. And to get or to tap into this potential of innovation, then the church was helpful because it expanded people's networks. Why? Because it dissolved European clan-based society. So people across the boundaries of clans started hanging out with each other. It fostered a psychology conducive for innovation. Just the idea that about authorship, is an idea that you not necessarily, or it starts emerging more strongly at some point, and it creates aspects of a common culture, of course, the church, a common language that transcends ethnic and clan boundaries. The big question is, how do we capture innovation going back in time? So this is work with Slava Savitsky, Max Posch, and Joe Henrik, and it's in preparation. How do we capture innovation going back in time? And what we're looking at here is now famous people. So we have a data set of 850,000 individuals just in Europe between the year 0 and 2018. This is mostly based on Wikipedia. We have the place of birth and death of those individuals. And the nice thing is we also have the field of endeavor. So we have creatives. These would be classified as science or culture. And we have non-creatives, politics, military, religion, and sports. And of course, we can do extensive validation with contemporary measures of innovation like patents. And we can show that those people that are classified as, or the share of people in an area that are classified as scientists or culture is highly predictive then of the number of patents and other indicators of innovation in the same region. And this is how it looks like over time. So on the left-hand side, I think that's the year 500. Not many famous people, but of course it might also have to do with going back in time. You lose records. In the year 1000, you see more innovation. And in the year 1500, you see then even more famous creative people. And we can do again the same approach where we look at when did the church arrive. So what you see here, this is at the pixel level. So these are regions and the extension of 170 kilometers times 110 kilometers. And we can ask, the church arrives, how long does it take, or is there a difference then in the emergence of famous creative people? And if we do this, we get this figure right here. So again, before the year 0, before the centuries before the church arrives, there's no difference between the regions where the church arrives and those that don't. Then when the church arrives, it's also not an immediate uptick, but around 200 years later, you see there's more famous creators in that regions where the church within Europe arrives. And you see that also the trajectory is quite steep. So over time, you get more and more famous creatives. Now you might worry, well, I mean, this is just, European development, and maybe the church also went into regions it kind of knew that they're going to be booming. What we can do is a placebo exercise. Now we're not looking at famous creative people. We can look at people that are famous due to other reasons, like they're famous businessmen, or they're famous lawyers, or famous nobles or warriors. And if we do this, we do not find the same pattern. So the pattern seems to be really unique to famous creative people. And that's a strong indication that what we're capturing here has something to do with the church coming in with these network structures. And I just want, before I want to talk more about these network structures, I just very quickly, I want to show you that this does not only have historical implications, it also has contemporary implications, because what you see here now is the duration of the medieval church up to the year 1500 on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, you see the number of patents per capita. And it's really clearly linearly lining up, so you have a positive relationship between the two. Okay, so now a bit more about the medieval church and networks. So the hypothesis is, again, church-connected individuals beyond the local level, contributing to these pan-European networks. And we explore the church effect on the evolution of social networks. So here now we are creating an indicator of networks. And the way we do it based on the migration patterns of famous creatives. So what we calculate is degree centrality, the number of direct connections a grid cell has to other grid cells via migrants. So these famous people migrated, and we connect the grid cells linked by famous migrants. So basically, we just count in a region how many links based on this migration does a region have to other regions, and that's our indicator of the degree centrality. And in this way, we are actually able to capture networks of regions based on famous people going back more than 1,500 years. And if you look at the evolution of these networks, in the left upper corner, this is the year 500, not very connected, but you see kind of the Roman Empire still imprinted. If you move to the year 1000, you already see that the networks are a bit moving to the northwest. Then you see that even more in the year 1250 and then in the year 1500. But you also see that these networks, the size of these bubbles are the size of the degree centrality. How many connections are there? They're also increasing tremendously. So here you have an indication of something changed in Europe when it comes to the network structure already before the year 1500. And then we can again do this event study regression, and if we do this, we kind of get causal evidence for this link between the duration that a region or regions experienced the rule of the Catholic Church and the uptick of the centrality of these regions. So here something changed, the social structure changed. And the last thing I want to show you now, because here I just connect the church to innovation, but the church is an institution with so many dimensions, so many things are changing. There's also political econ aspects. But what I want to zoom in now is a bit more on the incest legislation. And the way I want to do it is these incest legislation between the year 516 with the Synod of Epaon, or 511 in the Synod of Orleans. These were probably the first synods. It was a very decentralized process. It was, some bishops coming together in the Merovingian kingdoms saying we need to ban cousin marriage. Others were opposed. So they passed legislation that were really regional. And what you see here, these in this map, is all these places that had synods that, particularly before the year 800, that banned very decentralized cousin marriage. The nice thing is we do know who participated in these synods, and in this way we can create an indicator that captures this incest legislation exposure. For example, we know at the Synod of Orleans in 511, Licinius of Tours would participate. That means Tours experienced this legislation. Then we draw a radius about 100 kilometers around the Tours, and we say this area was now treated, this area now experienced in this time, this incest legislation exposure. And then we can repeat this for all 16 synods for which we have data and take the weighted average for a city and standardize. So now we get a measure of how a region within the Carolingian Empire was differentially exposed to this incest legislation exposure. And this is the map you see now on the left-hand side. the darker regions are regions that were strongly exposed to incest legislation exposure within a political entity that already experienced, that was already Christian. And on the right-hand side, we can have placebo synods. These are synods that were convened, but they didn't talk about incest. And here again, if I show you the figure as before, what you have is that regions that were treated, that were experienced that these early incest legislations later became or later had more diverse networks. Now, if we do the same exercise with these placebo synods that were also convened, we do not find the same pattern. And now I could go on and on and on. We have lots more data. I'll just summarize some of the other analysis that we do. Church also predicts social networks today. Medieval church exposure predicts whether people today on Facebook have friends that are closer in proximity or further away. More church exposure on Facebook, people have friends that live further away. It also predicts patenting networks today. More church exposure of two regions, there's stronger patenting networks across the boundaries of modern day countries today. We see it in family structures today. And one thing I want to stress, the basic mechanism behind that also holds in the contemporary, in the historical US. So this is now within a country, Western settler country, so more cultural diverse regions. And here cultural diverse, we use a measure that is very close to kin-based institution, fosters more innovation as well. All right, just to conclude, dissolution of clan-based social structure allows for assortment that fosters cooperation and innovation. And the medieval church marriage regulations contributed to this European divergent trajectory by dismantling these strong kin-based institutions, the European clan-based societies. And now I just want to offer some thoughts that I have about the Protestant Reformation, and it's a bit speculative in the sense that I'm not going to show you some data now. What I showed you is that already before the year 1500, Europe was on a different trajectory. Things were changing. And what I think happened is that the Catholic Church falls victim to its own success. So now clans are destroyed, people become more individualistic, and they continue to become more individualistic. And then the papal church, with its strong hierarchical structure, no longer fits to people's psychology. So people need a more individualistic religion that rewards individual entrepreneurship, for example. So and this lay then the seeds for the Protestant Reformation. It was also interesting when you look at the bottom-up uprisings following Luther, you see it's mostly in areas within Germany, for example, that had longer church exposure, while regions in the east you don't see this. So these uprisings, the peasant revolts, start in the southwest in Germany, but also the 84 revolution also in Germany also started in the southwest. But of course, once you have this Protestant Reformation, then this further fuels the divergence. It rewards work, basically the Protestant work ethic of favor. All right, thank you very much. I think we now have also some time for questions.